Hello everyone, and welcome back. Since we recently talked about bunkers, I thought we would look at the other side of the same coin and talk about god spots. First, let's define what a god spot actually is, as my definition of it for the purpose of this video is going to be pretty loose. A god spot is any reachable place in the game space that makes you immune, partially immune, or in any way inaccessible by a majority of the swarm composition. This will make a little bit more sense once we actually get into some examples, and we're going to go through basically all of them. We'll be moving along pretty quickly as there's around 20 of them of varying potency and accessibility, and I'll talk a little bit on each one as we go. So we'll start with the least applicable and least useful and work our way up till the most powerful ones. And when we want to talk about the most dangerous, unapplicable, and just downright stupid god spots in the game, the first one I think of is standing on top of a prospector. This bounces you around and makes you essentially immune to all melee enemies, but due to the fact that some friendly fire from other bugs can set off the prospector, and just the fact that you shouldn't be horsing around on top of a prospector, keeps this one at the bottom of the stack. Slightly more useful, the cave cruiser. You can hop on top of one of these as basically any class, if they get close to the ground of course, or as a scout at all times. These do float around quite a lot, so it can make aiming your weapons and staying away from the walls so melee bugs can't reach you a little bit difficult, but in a pinch, they're quite useful. And now topping off the really bad spots, we have the retractable vines in the hollow bow. While the bugs can't climb on top of these to reach you, you will be taking constant damage while you're standing on them, so not exactly a great spot to be standing, but I'd rather be getting pricked by a thorn than torn apart by a pack of slashers. Next up is a pretty niche one, the Duretta Cage in escort missions. Even once you take Duretta out of the cage, bugs will not be able to path anywhere on the cage, so either standing on top of it or standing at the bottom in the middle of it will make you immune to all melee enemies. And for a slight technicality, we have Duretta herself. Yes, whenever you're digging through the tunnels and you're close to the walls, bugs still can reach you from the areas around Duretta. However, once you get out into the open or are at a refuel stop, standing on Duretta makes you essentially immune to all melee threats. So, while this one doesn't really count as you're still in trouble whenever the bugs are beating on Duretta instead of you, it is quite handy in a pinch and probably the closest thing to a god spot that most people use quite often. Next we have the Brood Nexus. Very simply, hopping on top of one of these can allow you to be completely safe from all melee enemies. Although it does lose some points because it's incredibly janky to shoot off of this, as the hitbox for the Brood Nexus is constantly wiggling around and can cause you to impact bullets or projectiles onto it directly. And now we have a basically scout exclusive one. In the hollow bow, you have these bow cones hanging from the ceiling. You can actually jump up on top of them unless you shoot them to make them fall, and stand on them for quite a little bit of time, return some fire, and be safe from melee bugs. Something interesting that I encountered while recording this actually is that if a stabber vine stabs the bow cones off of the stem, it actually leaves an invisible hitbox that you can still stand on until you break it yourself. How's that for niche information? And probably second place for frequently used by people that don't know what a god spot is, you have the elevator plants. You can simply hop onto this plant, which is usually around ground level, and it will lift you up into the air, usually far away from a wall. This is probably one of the most accessible ones for all classes, and it's definitely saved me once or twice. Next up we have the Ebo Nut. Now before and after you actually harvest the Ebo Nut itself, you can stand on top of the whole Ebo Nut or the remnant base, and if you break the ground away from it, you'll be safe from all enemies. This is basically a driller exclusive spot, as only his satchel charge can clear the area around the Ebo Nut in a short amount of time. However, every now and then you'll encounter an Ebo Nut that's floating in the air. In those situations, you can make use of this on any class. Just make sure not to do any melee damage to the stem once you take the actual nut, or it will disappear. Now, starting to get into some big boy topics, pump jacks. Now, I keep this one so low on the list because you have a tendency to get stuck when you're climbing around on top of pump jacks, but once again, in a pinch, this can be quite useful. I found that you have to stand on the actual antenna of the pump jack to be completely safe, but even when you're just standing on the flat part of it, the bugs have a very hard time pathing to you. And considering that you're guaranteed to have pump jacks on every single refinery mission, you can use this spot very consistently. Now next we have sort of a two-parter. the glow trees and the trees in the REZ that are basically ashy skeletons. Both of these trees have the same properties. Once you climb up into the branches, the bugs are unable to path to you. Personally, I prefer the glow tree as you can shoot the bulbs to get some extra light and defend yourself from ranged enemies more easily, but in a pinch, they basically work the same way. That and they're incredibly easy to scale as every class, so this is a very universal trick. A new one with Season 2 is the antenna node. I'm sure plenty of people have run through the hacking event now, but I bet you didn't know that you could climb on top of the antenna node and be safe from all melee enemies. Now back to the topic of consistently available spots, here's another one similar to pump jacks. Now you can climb up on top of the minehead during a point extraction mission, but the bugs will still be able to get up to you, so this isn't a god spot. However, once you launch the rocket and end the mission, you are able to stand on top of the little sticks that were holding the minehead in place before it launched. And for some reason the bugs are no longer able to path up to this location. Now we're getting into the real big boy options. And this one will be at the bottom just because it's quite rare. However, the Omen Tower. You can simply stand in the middle of the Omen core and be completely safe from all bugs. Needless to say, this is available to all classes and incredibly easy to pull off. It just requires you to walk out into the middle of it. And needless to say, even once you extend the Omen Tower, you'll still be safe from all melee enemies. Now, this isn't the last one, but it might be my favorite on this entire list because I actually learned about it in the process of making this video. You can actually stand on top of the ejector cactus and be safe from melee enemies. This will conveniently bring the melee enemies extremely close to the cactus and cause them to get shot over and over again by the spines. Not exactly practical and quite slow in practice, but god, it's funny. And staying on the topic of spots that kill enemies, explosive plants. These come in a few different varieties and sizes, so make sure you stand on one that's large enough that doesn't allow the melee enemies to reach you. However, once a good bundle of enemies gathers up around you, shoot the plant and either dash or grapple away, and you can get a nice couple of kills for effectively free. If the ejector cactus wasn't so funny to watch, this would definitely be my favorite spot. A couple honorable mentions that I wasn't able to capture footage for this video just because I wanted to get it out in a good amount of time. You can ride on the back of a silicate harvester, as the carpool achievement may have taught some of you, and be safe from all melee enemies. And additionally, all other machine events, as well as the Omen Tower, can be stood on to make you immune to enemies. However, these are a little bit smaller and lower to the ground, so you might have to excavate the ground around them with a driller's satchel charge to make them safe to stand on. But obviously this causes some issues with things like cursite if you're trying to put the items into it. That's why it's just an honorable mention, because it can screw you over a little bit. And last, and certainly most, refinery. Just the refinery. The whole thing. I'm sure a lot of people have encountered this naturally. Upon climbing up on top of the refinery, you're completely safe from enemies. Nothing paths up here, only ranged enemies will be firing at you. This allows you to easily pick off a number of enemies while giving you a massive amount of space to move around, dodge ranged projectiles, and just hang out and catch your breath. Plenty of people know about this spot already, but I'm sure a lot of people didn't know about the rest of the spots on this list. But just due to how much room you have up at the top, and how discoverable and accessible it is by all the classes, I think this is the top of the list. Although my heart goes out to exploding plants and ejector cactuses. Now, before we wrap up, I do want to give you a disclaimer that not all of these spots are completely safe in all scenarios. Sometimes these spots will be extremely close to a wall, say an ejector cactus that's just in a narrow tunnel. Obviously in that situation it won't give you any sort of immunity or safety, so use these techniques with a little bit of intelligence. That and the larger enemies like bulk detonators and oppressors can often reach you in some of the shorter spots. So be aware of what's around you. That being said though, in the fact that this is a follow-up video to my bunkering video, I do think I like the god spots a little bit more, as you're still threatened by a number of enemies and it's more of a temporary thing just to catch your breath and pick off a few enemies while you're already in the middle of a fight. Plus, using exploding plants to style on your enemies is just a great feeling. And I'm saving the best one for myself. I'll never tell anyone. If you'd like to catch me live, I stream over on Twitch. If you'd like to talk to me or any of my community members, or tell us about some new god spots that you've found, you can find us over on Discord. And as always, thank you for watching, and have a nice day.